Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. As Dan McGraw was mentioning in the news earlier, a young boy recently opened fire inside his school in the Philippines. This is in Ateneo de Zamboanga. And I wanted to point out that school shootings have been rising across every continent. It's not just a uniquely United States problem. I also want to point out in a lot of the continents in nations where this is happening, they have some of the strictest gun control laws. And I would know firsthand. And so I have a vested interest in making sure that we navigate the situation rightly. Every school shooting forces especially us adults towards certain uncomfortable questions because logically, children don't wake up one morning and suddenly decide to commit spectacular violence. I also wish to point out, we don't know a lot of details about this case. And we do know details about other cases of recent history. I understand that. But what I want to offer wisdom is about the general situation, not so much specific cases. Because by the time that these particular cases of school shootings happen, the reality is there were certain things that were manifesting much earlier that we probably didn't pay attention to. I also want to point out there is no panacea. There is no one-size-fits-all. This is a tenuous, complicated situation. But I hope that the wisdom I'm about to share will help all of us be a little more wary about what's going on, especially parents more than anyone else, myself included. So I looked up different areas of research and reports. Research from the U.S. Secret Service National Threat Assessment Center, they conclude that there's no single psychological profile for school attackers, but different backgrounds, different personalities, different family situations, but they do discover recurring behavioral patterns. Many of the attackers have evidence of chronic rejection, bullying, severe social stress, untreated emotional struggles, prolonged grievances. All of these compound in different ways before a violent attack ensues. In fact, the FBI did a separate study and concluded the same thing in their behavioral threat assessment. The warning signs were existing and manifesting long before violence and its implementation. So our cultural conversation now could very well be about the merit of the public schooling system culture as it exists right now, as one of the factors. There's no one single explanation. I want to make that very, very clear. But the other thing we need to think about is that every tragedy is a convergence of psychological wounds, family struggles, social influences, and technological pressures. And all of these, unfortunately, impact a vulnerable mind towards something very dangerous. One disturbing development warrants for us to pay attention to. Modern school shootings increasingly look like theatrical productions, and this is what I mean. Psychologists and sociologists have been studying the situation, and they're seeing that this is more than an impulsive explosion of anger. They're describing these attacks as performance crimes. Now, what does that mean? The offenders are deliberately producing violence for an audience, whether before the event itself or the event proper. And a big part of this is to try to control the visual and digital narrative. So live streams, videos, manifestos put out. The killer sees himself as a kind of actor and director in a production that's designed for worldwide consumption. Now, they don't think of it as a theatrical production, but those elements exist. And so the violence, the act of violence here has a weird kind of entertainment value. It's the reason why slasher movies have an appeal to this very day. There's something about the gory and the horrific that attract certain people, and that's why there's high viewership for these things the moment they make the digital media. And it's heartbreaking, don't get me wrong. I personally don't have a preference for gore and horror, but there's a market for it. And so violence transforms into entertainment by digital technology, and it taps on a particular side of the human psyche. Dr. Adam Langford, he's a sociologist, he argues that many modern mass shooters display an obsessive desire for notoriety. But let me make very clear here, they're not trying to be TikTok famous. That's not what this is. They've felt unseen all their lives, and they've been raised now in a culture that has made them believe that your digital persona, if not recognized, is a measure of your worth. And so now this digital visibility is what they're looking for in terms of genuine significance. They're just looking for a desire to be seen and heard. And that's why these kinds of deviant alternatives are psychologically attractive. This notoriety is valuable to them psychologically. It's not about being a celebrity. It's that gaining some kind of attention, however it might be found, is what's of significant value here. It's their cultural currency, so to speak. And that kind of reasoning from a vulnerable mind at a vulnerable age shows us the kind of society we have built. Many children now are being raised in a worldview that is being trained to measure human dignity according to your achievements, your status, and because of the digital sphere right now, clicks, followers, viral attention. Previous generations struggled with different things, sure, but this is a brand new plethora that we are facing that's exacerbating the problem. Psychologists are also consistently discovering that many attackers travel through a recognizable progression before they get to full-blown violent implementation. So there's ideation, planning, preparation, and then the execution. And the signs apparently are there if we know how to be wary of them. Even more alarming is the phenomenon known as leakage. Now, leakage simply means that they openly communicate parts of these intentions, online conversations, journal entries, threatening comments, long before the actual implementation. So families and schools, parents, the onus is upon us to work even harder than previous generations to cultivate relationships where the children are receiving one-on-one attention, genuine attention, loving attention, constantly, not just occasional mass supervision. The meaningful, in-depth personal conversations from a young age as they develop, building relationships of trust, they actually expose these emotional deteriorations so that either love can be poured into it or help can be brought. And a parent who works hard at knowing his or her child, mind you, I am no expert. This is advice I am working towards living out myself. But parents notice subtle behavioral changes in their children. And the more we are involved, the more we come to reason the cause of them. Teachers who are genuinely invested also recognize similar unusual patterns. Friends, those who are involved in the lives of their friends, they will notice the indifference, the alarming statements, even if the friend is being silent, for the most part. Now, there's clearly a mental illness component to quite a lot of this, and psychiatric diagnosis continues to evolve in that front. And so we know that there's data here toward this. But note this, that even those with treated depression and anxiety and emotional instability, even those who have formal diagnosis, there have been cases where even in those situations, there's a devolution into these kinds of violent actions. So clinical psychosis and clinical diagnosis is only one part of the problem. It's not just about untreated mental illness. And thankfully, we're seeing a lot of progress in that front. But apparently, ubiquitously, one of the profound criteria here, or at least profound unifying factors, is humiliation as a central emotional driver, and to reclaim the conversation, to reclaim the social narrative of power. So bullying is apparently one of the core issues. But as I mention all of this, there really is no universal solution that immediately eliminates this issue. But there are things that we can do to try to mitigate as much as possible. And that means parents, households, to become more attentive, to be more involved individually in each child's life, to share meals and have real in-depth personal conversations every day, to learn about the worlds that our children are occupying, especially online, and to help foster their imagination and to find out where the imagination is going. And the greatest protection of all is going to be a life and a family identity that is so immersed in love and intimacy and warmth in faith in Jesus Christ. If we can do that, if we can keep fostering that kind of a life, we create the avenues for our children to approach their parents with a certain trust of knowing that even in their brokenness, they have pillars of support in parents and ultimately in Christ and the church. Stay tuned, I'm Marcus Peter.